Greetings. Shabbat Shalom. If you're hearing this on the Sabbath, and maybe some of you will be hearing it some other time, but we're glad that you have an interest in these messages. There was a scientist who was doing research, and he had a chimpanzee in his laboratory. One day he walked into the laboratory, and the chimpanzee was sitting at a desk. In his right hand was a Bible. In his left hand was On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. Well, the scientist was astounded. Before he could say anything, the chimpanzee began to talk. And he said, "I want to find out if I'm my brother's keeper or my keeper's brother." You know, if we want to live a life as human beings, if we want to survive, and not only survive, but survive with a quality of life that's really worth living, then we need to follow core values. We need to live according to core values. Otherwise, we'll have a jungle. We'll be like animals in the jungle, and ultimately, life will be miserable or ultimately even self-destructive. So we do need to have a system of ethics. I have a doctor's degree in religion and social ethics from the University of Southern California. So it's a field that I've studied. Today I want to talk from a biblical point of view about core values. I want to talk about core values. And I want to tell everybody out there who's listening that all human beings are accountable for these core values, because all human beings were created with the potential to have at least some sense of right and wrong. It's part of what makes us human beings. And so we are accountable. I want to go to Hebrews, the 9th chapter. Hebrews, the 9th chapter. And it's easy to remember. 9 times 3 is 27. At least they're numbers with a relationship. So let's go to Hebrews 9 and verse 27. "And it is appointed for men to die once, but after this the judgment." We are all going to be held accountable for the life that we have lived. We are all writing a record. The great book of wisdom, one book that I really enjoy, although it's disturbing in many ways. Maybe I enjoy being disturbed by the book. I want to go to Kohelet. I want to go to the book of Ecclesiastes, to the 12th chapter and the 14th verse. "For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil." How can we all be held accountable? Because we have a sense of right and wrong that is part of our humanness, perhaps you could say. Just as we have a sense of what is beautiful and what is ugly, we have a sense of what is right and what is wrong. That is why the American Declaration of Independence in 1776 began, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." Self-evident? We don't have to prove them because we all know them. We know them innately. Inherently, it's a part of our psyche, a part of our being human, that we know that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. This is something that people know, at least. Maybe we could say, you could argue, people might argue whether or not there was a Creator. Maybe they believe somehow in just chance and no intelligent design, how it all got here. To me, it takes a great faith to believe it's all here somehow or other. But not that I don't want to disparage people who are intellectual people, but on the other hand, the Bible does have some things to say about people who just absolutely want to deny the reality of a supreme being. But anyway, my point is that as far as human beings are concerned, we do have a sense of right and wrong, because we were created in the image of God. It's part of our being human. In other words, we have a conscience. Now, I'm not saying it can't be distorted. and it can't be in many ways messed up, if I had to use that kind of term, rather crass term. In other words, let's take our sense of beauty and ugliness. There are some things that most everybody would say are beautiful, and yet I suppose, there are also different tastes, and some things that might be rather grotesque to most people might be beautiful to some. See what I'm saying? So yes, there can be some variety there, and there can be distortion, and people can be pushed by outside forces in negative directions. Their conscience can be distorted. In fact, the Bible talks about those whose conscience is seared with a hot iron. I believe in Paul's writings to Timothy that some people, just after a while, because of constant going against their conscience itself becomes kind of numb. That happens too. But the whole point is that generally people acknowledge that such people are perverted, that such people are a distortion of what a true human being ought to be. Let's go to Genesis 1 and verse 27. So God created, this is Genesis 1 verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Men and women are created in the image of God. And part of that is a sense of what is right and what is wrong, a conscience. And the book of Romans talks about that. Every civilization, pretty much, has their teachers and their philosophers who teach people how to behave. We have, of course, the divine revelation, which is the best guide for how to behave. But various nations have at least had teachers who've taught them how to behave, who've taught them ethics. And in Romans 2, and I want to go to verse 12. Romans 2:12. For as many as have sinned without law will also perish without law, and as many as have sinned in the law will be judged by the law. If you have the advantage of God's revealed word, then you are really accountable. But even if you don't, people have a sense of right and wrong. Their civilizations, their great teachers have taught them, and their own sense of fairness has taught them. They wouldn't want somebody wanting to murder them or steal from them or be dishonest to them, and so they ought to realize, well, if I don't want somebody to do that to me, I shouldn't do that to somebody else. Let's go to verse 13. For not the hearers of the law are just in the sight of God, but the doers of the law will be justified. In other words, if what you hear today impresses you, I hope it does, but we have to act on it for it to do for it to really do any good. Ultimately, we have to act on it. Verse 14. For when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do the things in the law, these, although not having the law, are a law to themselves. They have a conscience. They're human beings, and they're civilized human beings with a conscience, who show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and between themselves their thoughts accusing or else excusing them. An international organization, which I believe is headquartered, it has been in Evanston, Illinois, in the United States, the Rotary International, an international service organization, has developed the four-way test of what we think, say, and do. The four-way test of what we think, say, and do. I have read that in the court rooms in Ghana, a nation in West Africa, Ghana was, I guess, the first of the nations of sub-Saharan Africa to become independent. I believe back in 1957, they began the long list of nations that broke away from the European empires and became independent. Well, as far as I understand, at least from what I've read, Ghana has in their courtrooms this four-way test, 24 words, a four-way test of what we think, say, and do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Is it beneficial to all concerned? I believe that I was the recipient of a scholarship from the Rotary International, or at least a free meal. I don't think I ate it, but it wasn't kosher. But anyway, but I had the opportunity to attend a Rotary luncheon, as I recall, and I received a plaque with the 4-weight test. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Is it beneficial to all concerned? Those 24 words, that 4-weight test. And it's based on 4 ethical principles. The first one is the principle of autonomy. The principle of autonomy. Each of us was created in the image of God. Each of us is a human being entitled to free moral agency, the opportunity to decide how we are going to live. And if you lie to somebody, you've taken away their freedom of action, because now they're acting on information that is not true. They're acting on false information, and they make a decision, and they may make a decision that would not be the decision that they would have made. You're manipulating them. You're using them. You are taking away their autonomy. And so the first value of what we think, say, and do is it the truth? I'd like to go to Exodus 20. Exodus 20 and verse 16. Exodus 20 and verse 16. The 9th commandment. You shall not, this is Exodus 20, verse 16. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. I want to go now to Deuteronomy 5 and verse 20. And what do you think is going to be there? The repetition of it. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Now, the Apostle Paul, writing to the church in Colossae, reminds them of this responsibility of Christians. Colossians 3 and verse 9, okay? What does Paul tell us? Do not lie to one another, since you have put off the old man with his deeds. Yes, it's true. People have a tendency to lie. Ever notice that? People have a tendency to lie. But that's not an excuse. We have to get rid of it. We have to overcome that. Paul says, do not lie to one another, since you have put off the old man with his deeds. We're not saying that you didn't lie in the past, but don't lie anymore. Is it the truth? The principle of autonomy. The next principle, is it fair to all concerned? That is the ethical principle of justice. The ethical principle of justice. Is what you think, say, or do being fair? Are you being fair? You know that Abraham challenged God himself on this point, because Abraham knew that God would have to be fair. Since God is perfect, then God is going to have to be fair. Abraham knew this, and he challenged God. Let's go to Genesis 18, and I want to go to verse 20. Verse 20, and the Eternal said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grave. This is Exodus 18, now verse 21. I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it has come to me, and if not, I will know. Well, obviously, he already knew, but here he's giving them, in a way, the benefit of the doubt by actually involving himself in Sodom and Gomorrah. 2 angels go there, in the guise of human beings. So the Sodomites think that they're human beings, and all right, they experience this kind of bad behavior there in Sodom. And so the point is that he's even willing to go above and beyond, because he's omniscient, and yet he's willing to send 2 spirit beings in the guise of men to actually go there, so the evidence is clear. There's no argument about it. So that's being fair already. But that's being beyond fair. But anyway, let's continue. Then the men turned away from there. The 2 angels, they went on to Sodom. Then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, but Abraham still stood before the Eternal. The Jewish tradition says that the original text is that Yahweh still stood before Abraham, because the Eternal had actually manifested himself there, had come in the form of a man. And so actually the original text was that here God is standing before Abraham. The Jewish scribes had such a problem with that concept that they changed it, but they acknowledged that. All right, so anyway, Abraham is standing next to God in this form. God has come in this form. And of course, later on in history, the Word of God became flesh, became a human being. And we know that's, from the New Testament. But this is, of course, the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ. Okay, so anyway, look at what he says to God. And Abraham came near and said, "Would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there were 50 righteous within the city. Would you also destroy the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous that were in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing as this." I believe that the famous attorney Alan Dershowitz called Abraham, in one sense, the first Jewish attorney. Well, actually, that's, of course, loose language, but we understand, what he means. Verse 25, "Far be it from you to do such a thing as this, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous should be as the wicked." By the way, another thing Alan Dershowitz said was that if he were teaching a course on ethics, the book of Genesis would be a wonderful book to work with. And he is not what you would call a believer. He's as far as I know, an agnostic. Anyway, verse 25, "Far be it from you to do such a thing as this, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous should be as the wicked. Far be it from you! Shall the judge of all the earth, shall not the judge of all the earth do right? Shall not the judge of all the earth do right?" So he's saying, you're God, you've got to be fair. And so then they have this negotiation where God says, all right, I'll spare the city if I can find 10 righteous men in the city. Well, that wasn't the case. So Lot and his family were taken out, and the 2 cities, as you know, were destroyed. You can read about that in the next chapter. So you see that God is fair, and Abraham challenged him on that. Later on, of course, as you know, Job challenges him on that. I want to go to Deuteronomy 16, the importance of being fair. Right now we're concerned with that in the United States with our own government, and if things have been, let's say, on the up and up in recent years. Let's go to Deuteronomy 16 and verse 18. "You shall appoint judges and officers in all your gates, which the Eternal your God gives you, according to your tribes, and they shall judge the people with just judgment." You see? This is important to have a justice system in a society. "You shall not pervert justice. You shall not show partiality, nor take a bribe. For a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the righteous." You all with me on this? And so various organizations have their systems of ethics. I recently had to study, as a teacher of English, the ethical system that's imposed on the Orange County Public School System, the employees of that system. Verse 20, "You shall follow what is altogether just. Tzedek tirdof. Justice you shall pursue." Or another term is righteousness. Righteousness, the term for righteousness and justice. In Hebrew, the term righteousness is used here. If something is fair, it is b'tzedek. It is with righteousness. "You shall follow what is altogether just." In the Hebrew, tzedek tirdof. "That you may live and inherit the land which the Eternal your God is giving you." I'd like to go now to Psalm 98. When God returns to judge the world, I talked about Jesus Christ, and he's going to return not as a sacrifice this time, but as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And when he returns, in Psalm 96 and verse 13, "For he is coming." Well, let's go start in verse 12. "Let the field be joyful in all that is in it. Then all the trees of the woods will rejoice before the Eternal. For he is coming to judge the earth. He shall judge the world with righteousness and the peoples with his truth. So he's going to be a righteous judge. He's going to be fair. Let's go to Psalm 98. Psalm 98. I'll start in verse 8. Let the rivers clap their hands. Let the hills be joyful together before the Eternal. For he is coming to judge the earth. With righteousness he shall judge the world, and the peoples with equity, with uprightness. So here again, the implication is that God is going to be a fair, impartial judge. Let's go now to the New Testament, to Acts, the 10th chapter. A very familiar verse to many of you, I hope. If not, I hope it becomes familiar to you. Acts 10 and verse 34, what Peter says, then Peter opened his mouth and said, this is Acts 10:34, in truth I perceive that God shows no partiality. So the implication, if we dig out the implication of this verse, it does have a contextual meaning, yes, but if we dig out the implication, we can say that God is fair, God is impartial. And so one of the principles of ethics is justice. Everybody should receive the consideration due that individual. The consideration, respect due that individual. Justice, fairness. Number 3, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? That is the principle of non-maleficence. I'm not talking about where there were these fairies, or in the Sleeping Beauty account, or maybe, well, I think Maleficent was the wicked fairy, right? Anyway, the wicked, whatever they were, these creatures, these fantastic creatures that could do things, magic. Anyway, but I'm talking about non-maleficence. The doctors are taught, do no harm. I think it's part of the Hippocratic oath, do no harm. I'd like to go to Romans 13 and verse 10. All of us, or many of us who know the Bible, know that the Apostle Paul was taught by the great rabbi, the greatest rabbi of his day, Rabban Gamliel, or as we would say in America, Gamaliel. He was taught by Gamaliel. Gamaliel was the grandson of Hillel. Hillel was the greatest rabbi of his day, and he died shortly before the ministry of Jesus Christ. So in effect, there's a transition from Hillel and then to Jesus Christ. And it's interesting that Gamaliel, the grandson of Hillel, taught the Apostle Paul, who's responsible one way or the other for most of the New Testament material. And Hillel taught, Ma shesanu alecha al ta'aseh lechavercha. He said, what is hateful to you, do not do unto your fellow. Do no harm, non-maleficence. Hillel taught that this was the basis of God's law. The whole basis of God's law in a statement was, what is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. And the Apostle Paul, as a student of Gamaliel, he writes this in Romans 13 and verse 10. Now, obviously, the Apostle Paul is also converted and a student of Jesus Christ. Romans 13 and verse 10. Love does no harm to a neighbor. Love, I believe, the church that many years employed me, its leadership taught that love is unselfish, outgoing concern. In the biblical sense, love, agape, is unselfish, outgoing concern. Love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. Okay? Love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. I'd like to go now to the fourth point, which is the point of beneficence. The point of beneficence. In other words, if you can do something good, then do it. If you have the opportunity to do something good for somebody else, then do it. Be a positive, be one who does positive things, who makes this world a better place to live. There's a principle in Jewish civilization of tikkun olam, repair of the world, because with Adam and Eve's sin, human civilization took a negative course. And so human civilization is a mixture of good and evil. So there's plenty that's not right, that needs to be fixed. And so human beings, during the time they're here, have responsibility for tikkun olam, repair of the world. And I want to go to the book of Galatians, where the Apostle Paul brings up, mentions this point. Galatians 6 and verse 9. I'll start there. Paul says, "And let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart." You can get discouraged trying to do the right thing, because a lot of people, unfortunately, are under pressure and will do the wrong thing. Or maybe they're not under pressure. Maybe they just haven't been properly trained, or have not really understood the repercussions of their deeds, and so they're doing wrong. And you're trying to do right. But in the long run, there is, as I said, accountability. And we all are writing a record that we're going to be responsible for. So do the right thing. If nothing else, give your life meaning. Make your life count for something. Advance the human condition. That's the least we can do. And let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Now, obviously, there's more to it than that. That's sufficient enough to want to do good, but there's more to it than that, because we understand that life is not just this physical life that we live now. There is a future. There is an eternal judgment. That's one of the doctrines of Christianity. In Hebrews, the 6th chapter of a Judeo-Christian doctrine is the resurrection and eternal judgment. And you can see that in Hebrews 6 and through the Bible. Anyway, I want to go to verse 10. This is important. The principle of beneficence. Is it beneficial to all concerned? Back to the Rotary International. Not that they were on Mount Sinai, but I'm saying these are principles that people know all around the world. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Is it beneficial to all concerned? So we have the principle of autonomy, the principle of justice, the principle of non-maleficence, and now the principle of beneficence. Therefore, Paul says in Galatians 6:10, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all. All right? Especially those who are of the household of faith. Especially to your fellow Christian. We're a minority in the world. We are vulnerable. We need to stick together and help each other. You know what Ben Franklin told the Americans? We've got to all hang together, or we will all hang separately. Some of you know that saying of Ben Franklin. So we certainly need to help our fellow Christians, but we need to be good to people in general. Galatians 6:10, therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith. Now, all of this was summarized in a positive way by Jesus Christ. Now, I believe that Jesus Christ met Hillel because he came to Jerusalem when he was 12, and Hillel possibly was there. And I believe that then the torch, in effect, was passed. Maybe Hillel didn't realize it, but the torch was then passed from the rabbis to the, Jesus Christ and the apostles. Anyway, he stated in a positive way what Hillel had taught in a negative sense. He taught it in a positive way, and that is the golden rule, which we summarize in America, in the English-speaking world, as do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Now that's found in Matthew 7 and verse 12, the climax of what we call the Sermon on the Mount. And it is, according to Jesus Christ, the basic summary of God's law. So let's go to Matthew 7 and verse 12. And again, 7 and 12 are easy numbers to remember if you're a student of the Bible. They're very significant numbers. Matthew 7 and verse 12, we come to the climax of the Sermon on the Mount. Therefore, Jesus says, these are the words of Jesus Christ as recorded by Matthew. Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them. Look what he adds. For this is the law and the prophets. This is really what the Christian way of life is all about, the golden rule. Therefore, whatever you want them to do to you, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. So, ladies and gentlemen, anybody listening to me today, but particularly if you consider yourself a Christian, we Christians must live according to these core values. I hope this message has been beneficial to you, and I hope it's been the truth and fear to all concerned, that it will build goodwill and better friendships and will be beneficial to all concerned. And in the meantime, I wish all of you all the best to you and yours.